even though Her Fearful Symmetry has a contemporary setting, I felt like the twins could have been set anytime because they're pretty narcissistic, you know. And your reference earlier to wanting to give the London that harks back to other authors, that's really interesting because this book reminded me a lot of The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it made me wonder, well, it has that kind of gothic feel that, to me, The Picture of Dorian Gray does. But I wondered if there were authors who had been an influence to you that, I mean, it felt almost Dickensian to me, the novel.
Yeah.
You really
well,
captured
that's
that.
pretty close. The people I was consciously thinking about and stealing from were Wilkie Collins, who of course was a good friend of Dickens, and Henry James, specifically Turn of the Screw and Portrait of a Lady. But with Wilkie Collins, the book I was actively thinking about was The Woman in White.
Sure.
And a lot of his plot depends on things like the resemblances between the two young women, and there's a lot of question about, you know, who's your daddy, and there's a lot of letter writing and all that sort of thing. So a lot of the devices that you find in there are kind of the quintessential Victorian sensation novel plot mechanisms, which I was using.
Yeah, and just the way that, you know, you do a wonderful job with settings, you know, in both of your novels. I really enjoyed the sense of place in London. You know, I love London, and although I've never been to Highgate Cemetery, I just, you know, it felt like you captured those old little alleys and, you know, quirky feel. But also in Time Traveler's Wife, you know, Chicago and South Haven just really come to life.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, both of these books technically are what we would call speculative fiction, which means that they exist in a world that's, you know, it has an imaginative, well, beyond imaginary. It has an aspect that couldn't exist in real life as we see it today, theoretically.
Yeah, the real world with one rule change.
Yes, but we're speculating about what would happen if. And typically, speculative fiction has a relatively small, a rabid, but relatively small readership. And I'm curious if you've been able to identify how your readers have leaped the fear they feel over reading speculative fiction and devoured these two novels. I mean, what do you think it is about your books that gets people past those labels?
I think nobody told them it was speculative fiction. Nobody said, well, this is a ghost story, you might not like it. This is science fiction, you might not dig it. I mean, they were both published as literary fiction. And recently I was talking to somebody who said that his definition of literary fiction was that a lot of tea is consumed. And I'm like, yeah, people drink tea in my novels. Yeah, they do.
And I don't get a lot of tea while reading your novels, so that's definitely true in this case. And you're right, that is where your books have ended up.
Yeah.
Along with some other notable examples like Jack Finney's books, Time and Again. And I do think that time travel is maybe a little more accessible concept to people than, you know, aliens coming down and invading our planet.
You know, I think science fiction has actually had such a profound influence on the culture.
Oh, yes.
That people now have grown up with it. It's not so weird. It's not considered geeky like it used to be. I mean, these days, I mean, in Britain, zillions of people watch Doctor Who. I mean, Doctor Who is beloved by one and all. And in America, I mean, Star Wars. We love Star Wars. And just all these iconic movies, which are certainly science fiction, but nobody insisted on that barrier, and so everybody just came out and enjoyed them and didn't have to worry about it.
You know, I've often wondered if the barrier is the work that's involved in world building, because when you go into a book and historical fiction can be that way too. You know, you have to create this world in your mind, you know, that the author is doing, and you don't make it easy necessarily for your readers, particularly in Time Traveler's Wife. You know, we are here and there, and we're two ages at once, and there's two of us there, two Henrys, and then one Henry, but people stuck with it.
I think the biggest thing that influences that, I get so much email from these guys who begin always, my wife made me read this, Or my girlfriend made me read this, and greatly to my surprise, I actually liked it. Or, I'll get email from, mothers who say, oh, my 16-year-old insisted that I read this. And so I think what's happening is that readers are giving it to other readers and saying, you must read this. And that's what gets a book beyond its core audience.
Well, that's definitely true.
Yeah, and I think booksellers do that as well. I mean, booksellers say, oh, well, I know this looks like science fiction, but you're really going to like it. It's really romance. Or it's really literary fiction, or it's whatever label they think will work. And I mean, I wish I could somehow break down a lot of these categories, because I know that the publishers and the booksellers find them useful. Because of course, if you like one romance writer, maybe you're going to like this other romance writer, and so everybody's kind of been trained to seek out certain parts of the library or the bookstore. But it would be so nice if one day it all just got jumbled up and you had to stand there staring at this chaos and just pick something out. Maybe you like it, or just let yourself branch out a bit from the usual. And I think that's how people's taste expands. I mean, either somebody they really respect insists, or they just happen upon it when they have nothing else to do.
Yeah, and that is a role that librarians find themselves thrust into often, as do booksellers. If you build a relationship with that patron and they trust you, they'll come back and say, I liked this book. Give me another one that I'll like.
Yeah, absolutely.